Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to just do a quick review of some initialization concepts in C++98 before we move on to looking at the amazing kinds of initialization, and they did really amaze me at first, that you can do in C++11. You can do some really wonderful things in C++11 that save you a lot of typing. But first let's do a quick review of some of the things in C++98. So in C++98, sometimes you can use curly brackets to initialize values. So for example, if we have an array, let's say int values, and put the brackets in there, equals, and let's have some curly brackets. So it's equal to the contents of the curly brackets, and we can put values in there like that. And if we output those, of course, they have the values that we expect. So that works in C++98. You can also use curly brackets to initialize public member variables of a class or a struct. So if we have a class like this, let's call it class, I'll call it class S1, capital S1, like this. Then if we have some public member variables like string, text, and int ID, we can then declare values here. Let's call this just C, massive capital letter C, and I'll call this lowercase c1. So when we declare a variable of this class type, we can actually just set it equal to some curly brackets like that, and we can put hello and 7 in there or something, and that works pretty much as you'd expect as well. So let's just output c1.text, for example. So we run this, and after a bit of compilation, there we go. So we've got the 1 coming out from up here, it's the first element in the array, and we've got hello. Now, with this style of initialization in C++, it's more commonly used with structs, because let's just copy this. If we have a struct, then by default the members of it are public, whereas if you don't specify public or private in a class, by default they are private. Let's call this struct S, and let's say S1 equals, and we'll give it hello and 7 again. So this is also going to work. If we run this, it works just as before, and we didn't need to specify public now. So structs are often used for specifying just bits of just kind of aggregating data together. It's like an aggregate type where you just need to store some bits of data together, keep them together. They're often used for that purpose. And you can also do stuff like if we have a struct, let's maybe copy this. In fact, I'll copy the whole thing again. So if you have a struct, you can declare member variables down here. Let's call this, I don't know what really, I'll just use a random letter, maybe R, let's call it R. We can initialize member variables immediately after the struct, so I could say R1 like that. We couldn't later use R1, or could we? Actually, maybe you can come to think of it. I always forget if I don't use this stuff for a while, but let's try this. So we've declared a variable R1 just by putting it after the closing struct bracket before the semicolon. Later on we're trying to initialize it, which now I come to think of it, I think might work, but no, it doesn't. So we can't use that here, it's only for initialization. I really couldn't remember that. Let's paste it in here. Now we expect it to work. So let's run this, and indeed we get hello. And if you don't want to use this type again, you don't even have to put in the name of a type. You can just use this kind of syntax just to initialize some values. We could even have like a comma separated list here. So we could have R2, let's change this to high, and 9, and let's maybe output something from R2 as well. So you can use this kind of anonymous data type syntax with classes as well. It also works, and but bear in mind that these have got to be public, and then you can initialize values quite happily down here, like a comma separated list, and you can initialize it with this curly bracket syntax. Now that's all well and good, but the use of curly brackets in C++98 is pretty limited, and in particular there's a kind of bad deficiency in C++98, which is the following. If we have a vector like that, and we're using the standard namespace there, let's declare a vector of string, and let's call it strings or something like that. Let's say strings dot push back. So supposing I want to initialize this with lots of different values, and you've seen me doing this many times in this course and the course that this follows on from as well, which is the free C++ for complete beginners. If we run this, yes, this works, it's fine, but such a tedious business of calling push back for all the values in a vector. And in the next tutorial, we're going to look at a kind of generalization of this bracket initialization. It's a little bit different, and we can basically use curly brackets everywhere in C++11 to initialize things. And we can even use it to initialize vectors, and we can even do this with our own custom types, which is very amazing. So I'll leave it there for this tutorial. If there's anything in there that you don't already know, it is worth just typing out this and checking it for yourself, checking that you understand it, because all of this is pretty common C++ syntax. Okay, so until next time, happy coding.